What if I told you that every dollar sitting in your savings account right now isn't actually money at all? It's debt. And the difference between understanding that and ignoring it could mean the difference between preserving your wealth and watching it evaporate over the next few years. Let me explain what's really happening here, because this is something most people never learn, and the banks certainly aren't going to tell you. When you deposit money into your savings account, you think you're storing value, you think you're being responsible, you think that money is safe. But here's the reality that's going to sound crazy until you understand how the system actually works. That money you deposited, the bank doesn't have it anymore. They lent it out. What you have is an IOU, a promise that the bank will give you dollars back when you ask for them. And those dollars themselves, they're not backed by anything real. They're backed by debt. This is the fundamental structure of our monetary system, and it's not a conspiracy theory. It's just how fiat currency works. Every dollar in circulation was created through debt. When the Federal Reserve wants to increase the money supply, they don't print money and hand it out. They create it by purchasing government bonds, which are debt instruments. The government borrows money into existence. Commercial banks do the same thing through fractional reserve lending. When you take out a loan, the bank doesn't take money from someone else's account and give it to you. They create new money, literally out of thin air. And that money is backed by your promise to pay it back with interest. So when you're saving in dollars, you're saving in debt. You're storing your wealth in IOUs that are constantly being diluted because more debt is always being created. And here's where it gets really interesting. The system requires constant debt expansion to function. If debt stops growing, the whole thing collapses. Think about that for a second. The currency you're using to save for retirement, to protect your family, to build wealth, it only maintains its perceived value as long as more and more debt keeps getting created. The moment that stops, the game is over. Now contrast that with gold. Gold isn't anybody's liability. When you hold physical gold, you're not holding a promise. You're holding an asset that's been recognized as valuable for thousands of years across every civilization. Gold can't be created out of thin air. It has to be mined, refined, and that process is expensive and time-consuming. There's a finite amount of it. The total amount of gold ever mined in human history would fit in a cube about 67 feet on each side. That's it. And new supply only increases by about 1% to 2% per year through mining. Compare that to the dollar supply, which can be expanded by trillions at the stroke of a keyboard. During the financial crisis, the Fed's balance sheet went from under $1 trillion to over $4 trillion in just a few years. During the pandemic response, they added trillions more. That's not wealth creation. That's currency debasement. Every new dollar created dilutes the value of every existing dollar. It's basic supply and demand. Before we go further, I want to mention something quickly. I put together a free guide that breaks down the saving secrets thousands of American retirees are using right now to protect their hard-earned wealth from exactly what we're talking about. It's in the description below. No cost, just practical information you can use. Grab it if you want to understand your options better. Now, let's talk about what's happening right now in the precious metals markets, because this is where things get really fascinating. Gold recently pushed above $4,600 per ounce. Silver is trading near $90. These aren't random numbers. These are prices that reflect something fundamental changing in how the world views currency and value. Central banks understand this better than anyone. They're the ones creating the currency, so they know exactly what it's worth, or more accurately, what it's not worth. And what are they doing? They're buying gold at the fastest pace in decades. The World Gold Council reported that central banks added over 1,000 tons of gold to their reserves last year. That's not a small amount. That's a massive accumulation. And it's not just one or two countries. It's happening globally. China's been particularly aggressive. They've been reporting monthly increases in their gold reserves, and most analysts believe they're actually buying far more than they're reporting. Russia's been doing the same thing. India, Turkey, Poland, Singapore, these aren't small players. These are major economies, and they're all moving in the same direction, away from dollar dependence and toward hard assets. Why? Because they can see what's coming. The debt levels are unsustainable. The US national debt is over $36 trillion now. The interest payments on that debt are approaching the entire defense budget. Think about that. We're spending almost as much just to service our debt as we spend on our entire military. and there's no plan to pay it down. There's not even a plan to stop it from growing. The only plan is to keep creating more currency to make the payments and hope the system holds together. But here's what happens when you do that for too long. The currency loses credibility. Other countries start looking for alternatives, and that's exactly what we're seeing with the BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and the expanding group of countries joining them. They're actively working to reduce dollar dependence. They're settling trade in their own currencies. They're talking about gold-backed trade mechanisms. This isn't theoretical. This is happening right now. When the dollar loses its status as the world's reserve currency, and that process is already underway, it's not going to be a gradual, gentle decline. It's going to be a repricing event. All those dollars that have been circulating globally for decades, funding trade and sitting in foreign reserves, they're going to come home. And when they do, the inflation we've seen so far is going to look mild by comparison. This is why gold and silver aren't just going up. They're repricing relative to a currency that's being systematically devalued. When you look at gold's price in dollars, you're not really seeing gold become more valuable. You're seeing the dollar become less valuable. Gold is just the measuring stick that reveals the truth. Let's go back to the early 1970s for a minute, because there's a parallel here that's really important to understand. In 1971, President Nixon closed the gold window. Up until that point, foreign governments could exchange their dollars for gold at a fixed rate. But the US had been printing so many dollars to fund the Vietnam War and domestic programs that other countries started demanding their gold back. France famously sent a warship to New York to pick up their gold. The US didn't have enough gold to back all the dollars in circulation, so Nixon ended the convertibility. That was the moment the dollar became a pure fiat currency, backed by nothing but faith in the US government. And what happened to gold's price? In 1971, gold was $35 per ounce. By 1980, it hit over $800. That's not because gold changed. It's because the dollar's relationship to real value changed. The currency was unmoored from any physical constraint, and the market repriced accordingly. We're in a similar moment now, except the scale is much larger. The amount of currency creation, the level of debt, the global nature of the dollar system, it's all magnitudes bigger than it was in the 70s. And the repricing, when it fully plays out, is going to be proportionally larger. Here's something most people don't realize about silver specifically. Silver is both a monetary metal and an industrial metal. It's used in solar panels, electronics, medical applications, electric vehicles, batteries. The industrial demand for silver is massive and growing. But here's the problem. We're mining less silver now than we were a decade ago. Primary silver mines are declining. Most silver comes as a byproduct of copper, lead, and zinc mining. When those metals aren't profitable to mine, silver production drops too. So you've got increasing industrial demand, declining supply, and on top of that, you've got investment demand surging, as people wake up to the same monetary dynamics we're talking about. The US Mint can't keep up with demand for silver eagles. Premiums on physical silver are running well above spot price because there's a shortage of available metal. Dealers are struggling to source inventory. This is a setup for a supply squeeze that could send silver's price much higher very quickly. And unlike gold, which is primarily a monetary metal, silver has this industrial component that creates constant, non-discretionary demand. Electronics manufacturers need silver. Solar panel producers need silver. They can't just decide not to buy it because the price went up. They have to have it. Now, let's talk about what this means for your savings, because that's what really matters here. If you've got money sitting in a savings account earning maybe 4 or 5% interest right now, you might think you're doing okay. But let's do the math. If inflation is running at 6, 7, 8%, which is closer to the real rate when you factor in food, energy, housing, and healthcare, you're losing purchasing power every single year. Your account balance might be going up nominally, but your actual wealth is shrinking. And that's assuming the bank stays solvent. Remember, your deposits are the bank's liabilities. They owe you that money. But they don't have it. They lent it out. If enough people try to withdraw at the same time, the bank fails. We saw this happen with Silicon Valley Bank and several others recently. The FDIC insurance covers up to $250,000 per depositor, but the FDIC doesn't have anywhere near enough money to cover a systemic banking crisis. They have a tiny fraction of what would be needed. In a real crisis, you'd be waiting months or years to get your money back. And by the time you did, it would be worth far less than when you deposited it. Gold and silver don't have counterparty risk. When you hold physical metal, you own it outright. It's not dependent on a bank's solvency or a government's promise. It's just there. It's real. It's tangible. And it's maintained its purchasing power across centuries. There's a reason wealthy families have held gold for generations. There's a reason central banks hold thousands of tons of it. There's a reason that in every major currency crisis throughout history, people have fled to precious metals. It's not superstition. It's not outdated thinking. It's recognition of a fundamental truth about value and wealth preservation. Here's another angle to consider. The paper gold market, the futures contracts traded on the COMEX, represents far more gold than actually exists in deliverable form. It's estimated that there are over 100 ounces of paper gold claims for every ounce of physical gold in the vaults. This works fine as long as most people are content to trade paper contracts and never ask for delivery. But what happens when that changes? What happens when a significant number of contract holders demand physical delivery? We've already seen stress in this system. There have been moments when the spread between paper gold prices and physical gold prices widened significantly because physical metal was hard to source. If that dynamic accelerates, if more investors lose faith in paper claims and demand physical metal, the price discovery mechanism breaks down. The paper price becomes irrelevant, and the physical price goes to wherever supply and demand actually meet, which could be dramatically higher than current levels. This is why the smart money isn't just buying gold exposure through ETFs or mining stocks. They're taking physical delivery. They're holding the actual metal. Because they understand that in a real crisis, paper claims might not be honored or might be settled in devalued currency, but physical metal is always going to have value. Let me tell you about something that happened during the last major financial crisis. In 2008, when Lehman Brothers collapsed and the banking system was on the verge of total failure, there was a moment when physical gold became almost impossible to buy. Dealers were sold out. Premiums spiked. People who wanted to buy gold couldn't get it at any reasonable price. Meanwhile, the paper gold price was actually dropping because leveraged investors were being forced to sell their positions to meet margin calls. That disconnect, where paper prices fell but physical metal became scarce and expensive, that's what happens when a crisis hits. The people who already owned physical gold were protected. The people who thought they'd buy it when they needed it found out they were too late. The window had closed. We're potentially approaching another one of those moments. The warning signs are all there. Debt levels that can't be sustained. Currency creation on a scale never seen before. Geopolitical tensions rising. De-dollarization accelerating. Central banks accumulating gold. Physical metal markets showing signs of stress. These aren't random events. They're all connected, and they're all pointing in the same direction. Now, I want to address something important here. If you're sitting on retirement accounts, IRAs, 401ks, and you're wondering how this applies to you, there's actually a way to hold physical gold inside those accounts without triggering taxes or penalties. It's called a gold IRA, and it's something more and more people are looking at as they realize the risks in traditional retirement portfolios. I put together a detailed guide on how this works. It's free. It's in the description. It covers the mechanics, the rules, the benefits, and the potential drawbacks. If you've got $100,000 or more in retirement accounts, this is worth understanding. Not saying it's right for everyone, but it's an option that exists. And in the current environment, it's an option that makes a lot of sense for wealth preservation. The basic idea is simple. Instead of having your retirement savings in stocks, bonds, and mutual funds, all of which are paper assets that can be devalued through currency creation, you hold physical gold and silver in a tax-advantaged account. The metal is stored in an IRS-approved depository, you maintain the tax benefits of the retirement account, and you've got a hedge against the exact monetary dynamics we've been talking about. Anyway, back to the bigger picture here. Let's talk about what happens next, because that's what everyone wants to know. Where are gold and silver prices headed? And the honest answer is, nobody knows exactly. But we can look at the fundamentals and make some educated assessments. If gold is currently trading around $4,600 per ounce, and we're still in the early stages of a global monetary reset, where does it go when that process accelerates? Some analysts are calling for 6,000. Some are saying 10,000. Some of the more aggressive forecasts are talking about numbers that sound crazy until you understand the math behind them. Here's one way to think about it. If you wanted to back the current US money supply with the gold held by the US Treasury, what would the price of gold need to be? Depending on which measure of money supply you use, you get different numbers, but they're all dramatically higher than current prices. Some calculations put it at 15,000 per ounce, some put it at 20,000 or more. Now, I'm not saying that's where we're headed, but it illustrates the point that gold is still undervalued relative to the amount of currency in circulation. Silver's math is even more interesting. The historical gold to silver ratio has averaged around 15 to 1 over long periods. Right now, it's around 50 to 1. If that ratio reverts to historical norms and gold is at 4,600, silver should be over $300 per ounce. Even if it only gets halfway back to historical norms, you're looking at silver prices well above current levels. But here's what's really important to understand. This isn't about trying to time the market or make a quick profit. This is about recognizing a fundamental shift in the monetary system and positioning yourself accordingly. When you save in debt-based currency, you're making a bet that the system will continue to function as it has, that your purchasing power will be preserved, that the promises made by banks and governments will be kept. When you save in gold and silver, you're not making a bet. You're holding real assets that have intrinsic value, regardless of what happens to the financial system. If the dollar maintains its value, gold and silver will still be worth something. If the dollar collapses, gold and silver will be worth a lot more in dollar terms, but more importantly, they'll maintain their purchasing power in real terms. Think about it this way. An ounce of gold has always bought roughly the same amount of goods and services throughout history. In Roman times, an ounce of gold would buy a fine toga, a belt, and sandals, basically a nice outfit. Today, an ounce of gold will buy a nice suit. The purchasing power is roughly the same. What's changed is the number of currency units it takes to buy that ounce of gold. In Roman times, it might have been a certain number of denarii. Today, it's thousands of dollars. But the gold itself, its real value, has remained stable. That's what real money does. It preserves purchasing power across time. Fiat currency, by design, loses purchasing power over time. That's not a bug, it's a feature. The system is designed to encourage spending and discourage saving, because if everyone saved, the debt-based system would collapse. They need you to keep your money in the banking system, keep it circulating, keep it available to be lent out and multiplied through fractional reserve lending. But here's the thing, you don't have to play that game. You can opt out. You can convert your debt-based savings into real assets. And you don't have to do it all at once. You can start small, buy an ounce of silver. See how it feels to hold real money in your hand. Understand the difference between a piece of paper with numbers on it and a tangible asset that has weight and substance. A lot of people are intimidated by precious metals because they don't understand them. They think it's complicated, they think you need to be an expert, but it's actually simpler than the traditional financial system. You buy metal, you store it securely, you own it. There's no counterparty risk, no fine print, no hidden fees eating away at your value. It's straightforward. The complicated part is understanding why you need to do this, and that's what we've been talking about. Once you understand the nature of fiat currency, once you see how the debt-based system works, once you recognize the risks inherent in saving in dollars, the decision to hold some gold and silver becomes obvious. Now let's address some common objections, because I know what some of you are thinking. Gold doesn't pay interest, it just sits there. That's true, but your savings account interest isn't keeping up with real inflation, so you're losing purchasing power anyway. At least with gold, you're not losing purchasing power, you're preserving it. What if I need to sell it quickly? Physical gold and silver are among the most liquid assets in the world. You can sell them anywhere, anytime. Try selling your house quickly. Try liquidating a retirement account without penalties. Gold and silver can be converted to cash in hours if needed. What about storage and security? You can store it yourself in a safe. You can use a bank safety deposit box. You can use a private vault service. There are options for every situation and budget. And yes, there might be some cost involved, but compare that to the cost of losing purchasing power year after year in a savings account. Isn't this just fear-mongering? Look, I'm not trying to scare anyone. I'm trying to educate. The facts are the facts. The debt levels are real. The currency creation is real. The central bank gold buying is real. The de-dollarization is real. These aren't opinions, they're observable phenomena. Whether you choose to act on that information is up to you, but ignoring it doesn't make it go away. Here's what I think is going to happen over the next few years, and this is just my assessment based on the trends we're seeing. The dollar is going to continue losing purchasing power. It might happen gradually, or it might happen in sudden steps during crisis moments, but the direction is clear. Gold and silver are going to continue repricing higher in dollar terms, not because they're becoming more valuable, but because the dollar is becoming less valuable. At some point, and this could be years away or it could be sooner than we think, there's going to be a reset of the global monetary system. It might be a formal reset where governments and central banks sit down and create a new framework. It might be a market-driven reset where the current system simply breaks down and something new emerges from the chaos. But either way, when that reset happens, the people holding real assets are going to be in a much better position than the people holding paper promises. This isn't about getting rich. This is about not getting poor. This is about preserving the wealth you've already accumulated. If you've worked your whole life, saved money, built up a nest egg, the last thing you want is to see that evaporate because you didn't understand the nature of the currency you were saving in. Gold and silver are insurance. They're a hedge against monetary chaos. They're a store of value that's independent of the financial system. And in the current environment, with everything we've discussed, that insurance is looking more valuable every day. I want to leave you with one final thought. Throughout history, every fiat currency has eventually failed. Every single one. The average lifespan of a fiat currency is around 27 years. The dollar has been a pure fiat currency since 1971. We're well past the average lifespan. Now, does that mean the dollar is going to collapse tomorrow? No. The dollar has advantages other currencies didn't have. It's the global reserve currency. It's backed by the largest military in the world. It has network effects that give it staying power. But those advantages are eroding. And when they're gone, the dollar will face the same fate as every other fiat currency in history. It will lose value until it's eventually replaced by something else. The question isn't if, it's when. And the answer to when is, we don't know. But we do know the process has already started. So what do you do with that information? You prepare, you diversify, you hold some real assets alongside your paper assets. You understand the risks you're taking with every dollar you keep in the banking system. You make informed decisions based on facts, not on what's comfortable or convenient. And if you've made it this far in the video, I want to offer you something. That free guide I mentioned earlier, it's in the description. But for those of you who've watched all the way through, there's something else. If you're an American retiree with at least $100,000 in any retirement account, you can get a free one-on-one educational web conference. No obligation, no sales pressure, just education about your options. When you request the guide, just mention you watched this video all the way through and you'll get access to that exclusive consultation. The world is changing. The monetary system is changing. The question is, are you going to change with it, or are you going to keep doing what you've always done and hope for a different result? The choice is yours, but the information is here. The tools are available. The path forward is clear. Stop saving in debt. Start saving in real value. Your future self will thank you.